Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 348, and I had a conversation with Daniel Hawkins. Daniel is an exceptional visual artist and musician. In 2017, he built a fully functioning 50-foot solar-powered lighthouse in the Mojave Desert after an extraordinary experience compelled him to do so. I met him at a show in Los Angeles featuring the Desert Lighthouse documentary and artists who have paid homage to the lighthouse. By the way, the 30-minute documentary on YouTube is linked on my heyhumanpodcast.com site, and it's an incredible watch. I highly recommend it. Side note, also at the show was Val Kilmer's work for his Notes on Nature show, which was really cool. Check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links, Hey Human merch, and to learn more about my guests in the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn about me and my other artistic endeavors. I'm making a film. I'm working on new music. You can find my albums on Apple Music or wherever you get music. My most recent record, All I Ever Wanted Was Everything, is there, along with How to Say Goodbye and other albums that I've made, Surfacing to Breathe. My sex and relationships talk show with my friend Mara Edelman, who's a sexologist and relationship coach, is on YouTube under youtube.com Are We There Yet podcast show. And as usual, you can find me on social media under Susan Ruthism, SUSANRUTHISM, and you can email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. Rate, review, subscribe to Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey Human is an ad-free show. Your donations help keep it going. You can find the contribute button on heyhumanpodcast.com. And I think that's all the news I've got. Thank you for listening. Be well, take care of each other, be loving, and get outside and look up. There's a lot going on. And no, that's not a commentary on the balloon. I just mean in general. All right, let's get into this. Here we go. Daniel, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming over.
Of course.
I know, it's a bit of a haul, I guess, coming here.
It's fun. I haven't been to the West Side much since my time at UCLA, which I went there for my undergraduate art degree. And so the spot just down the street along the ocean, I probably haven't stood there since 2008, 2009.
Oh, wow.
So
Isn't it great?
It's incredible. And it's strange that I'm 40 minutes away in Eagle Rock and the ocean doesn't exist to me. It's like completely off my radar. And here you come, and you have the breeze and the smell and the ocean. Mm-hmm. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's been chilly, but now that the sun's starting to be more persistent, when you open all the windows, let the cross breezes go, it's the best.
I bet. Yeah. And that smell, like there's something about that ocean smell.
Yeah, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so being surrounded by water all the time, you don't realize how much you miss it.
Yep.
So I spent the first time here in Los Feliz, which
fantastic.
is great, but very dusty and no ocean nearby. You know?
And the summers get to be a bit warmer.
So hot.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you. Where are you from?
I am from all over the place. When people ask me that question, they'll say, where's your hometown? I have no hometown. I was born in Colorado, and then I moved to England. 3 years near Bristol in a tiny town called Almondsbury. And then I moved to Northern California in south of San Francisco. And then I moved to Austin, Texas. And then eventually I found myself in Los Angeles. And I've been here close to 20 years.
Family of?
Technology.
Okay.
Yeah. So wandering kind of the corporate tech.
Interesting.
Landscape.
Close family?
What do you mean?
Your family.
Am I close?
Yeah. Is your family a close family?
We're pretty close, yeah. I think with the pandemic and like my brother has kids now, I don't have kids. The landscape of the family changes quite a bit and like the structure of it. And so I'm a little bit more on the periphery now that I'm the one kind of child without kids. So, but we are close, yeah. And we've kind of had to be a pretty tight-knit group moving around so much.
Yeah, I always wonder because you're an artist,
Yep.
and when artists are raised by technology, it's a curious mix. Although technology is art in and of itself, but...
What makes me more perplexed is when artists have artist kids. Because I find one of the things that drew me to art is the biggest thing is that my internal world often doesn't synchronize with my external world. Communities that I'm in, it's like everything's so square, everything's so like there's certain expectations of like how you fill your time and what you explore with, you know, your resources that you have. And I'm always moving around so much, have resorted to a much more imaginative, like, oh, this is what I want my life to be, this is what I want my world to be. And so that, I think, just created a kind of internal creativity that then I've since tried to kind of
foster.
Yeah, cultivate.
Pull out.
Exactly. With my parents are pretty traditional. They kind of are much more of like a 50s revival family where like rather conservative, traditional, religious, which is great. Like I have no problem with that, but I kind of don't identify with that. And so following in their footsteps never really kind of like rung true to me. I think I never found that much excitement. I think a lot of people can find excitement of like, oh, I'm going to go work for this like big company and we have so much innovation and stuff. And it's like, no, I want to cultivate these more bizarre kind of internal impulses and narratives and imagined worlds. And so I always found myself very drawn away from my father's path, my mother's path, and my brother's in technology as well, so away from my brother's path. And so
how did they react to that?
I think more and more they actually dislike it. I mean, I think they're supportive very much, but I think they struggle to relate. And so thinking about, I know tons of artists with kids and kids that are, you know, in their 20s and they're pursuing the arts, and I kind of thought like, wow, like, do they not have the impulse to do something different and have their own world? And that might be being a lawyer or a doctor, and like they've existed in this kind of Los Angeles creative space for so long. And I would almost find myself, had I been raised in LA or New York among like a creative bohemia, I probably would have gone into like politics or law or something as a way to kind of break free and create almost like a new life different from what I was raised.
I think it depends on how the world is modeled to you.
Yes. Yeah.
That makes all the difference.
And whether you want to kind of perpetuate that model or break from it.
Without it might even be subconscious.
Yeah.
In that too. And where are you in the birth order?
I'm the youngest.
And that also makes a difference.
Probably.
There's a freedom to being the youngest.
Yes. Yeah,
by the time we come along, they're exhausted. They just stop worrying so much.
Are you the youngest as well? Oh, yeah. And I experienced that quite acutely, is that my brother, I feel bad for him. He had to...
Expectations.
Yes, and everything the first time around. And it does make sense that he's very much following in my father's footsteps and has the family, 2 kids, just like, you know, what I came from. And so he's carrying a different burden, so thank him.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to him.
For sure.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started to realize you had artistic talent?
That was more in the high school range. Moving around, particularly the time in Europe, and I was quite young. I was, I think, between like 5 and 8, but we would travel all around, and so we would travel through like Transylvania area, you know, like Hungary and all these places, and there's so much history and folklore, and so that's like so rich for a child's imagination. And then moving from England to Northern California, I didn't know the difference between like Los Angeles and the Bay Area. I just thought all the movies happen in California, and it's the American West, and you know, there's so much history, and someone once described to me, a professor in college said that the thing about California and generally the West is it's the landscape of our country's cultural imagination, which I really like that sentiment. And I feel like that's kind of rung true for me, which is for so much time in our society out here in California, there's been so much projected potential. And then you have the movie industry and stuff. So I think moving from England to California was so exciting, and the bands and the movies and the music. And I think that's when my imagination really kind of took off. And then I moved from Northern California to Austin, Texas for high school, which I wasn't as thrilled about because I kind of thought like, I've been to Austin, I don't know. And I wasn't as versed in the music industry there. But that's where I think my world kind of turned inward. And I was a bit more socially shy. And then that's when a lot of drawing began. That's when painting began. And I had some really wonderful art teachers that kind of helped cultivate and encourage. And
that's a tough time to change schools, too.
Very tough.
I mean, adolescence alone is a nightmare.
Yes. Yeah. I did not take to that well. And it was a time period. So I moved to Austin, Texas in, I forget the exact date, but in 2000. And so I was kind of early adolescence, already not happy about a kind of a big change in my environment, in my friends, in the landscape around me. And then 9/11 happened. And that was a huge kind of rupture. And that kind of really kind of changed my psyche quite a bit, as so many people my age and younger and older. And I would kind of come to realize later that like my work and my thoughts in general tend to steer pretty existential, and definitely I have a lot of like fears and like kind of feeling like the world's like a very dangerous, churning place. And I think that time period really kind of like defined that. And like thematically, I can't help it. It's like every project that I work on seems to have like a landscape element and like a giant existential question of where I exist in the landscape, and where I'm going to. Am I untethered? Where's my community? All that kind of stuff.
When you work on projects now, do you see the lineage of where you began in that period of time when you started having the realization that you're this being on a planet that is tumultuous and has so many issues? I mean, did you see the beauty too?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But is there a lineage that is threadable from then to now, or do you think that each time you make a leap?
It's like a complete through line. And that's like an interesting thing, because sometimes I want like, can I just turn a completely fresh page? But then I see like, even if I'm amidst a project and I didn't see the lineage right at the start, as soon as I start kind of looking over things that are manifesting, I realize, oh, like I haven't escaped this theme, I haven't escaped that theme. This all kind of traces back, and this is probably going to be the like overarching story of my creative life through however long I get to have it for.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's interesting too to think about the West being the cultural hotbed versus even New York. But then I think about New York as a land of first generation Americans, a land of immigrants who just put their head down and worked hard, and to be an artist would be unheard of in a family who just got there to break their ass to make sure that they thrive.
Absolutely.
There wouldn't be the freedom for a child of a first generation, probably.
I can't imagine.
It would be quite difficult.
The few that probably did do that, they were, I imagine, massive outliers. I think if I had been the older child or a middle child, I think the opportunities to kind of branch off might not have been there. And someone can kind of forge their way and they can kind of break from their family. But like, I do think people overestimate their abilities to like turn their back on expectation and everything. And when you're the youngest, it's kind of like, all right, well, you know, we're set. We've the first one has survived, or the second one has survived, and
you
now,
become a spare, and
exactly,
to eloquently say it.
And you kind of you're like working a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, I agree.
But there is a interesting kind of lineage of less so like poor working class immigrants from Europe, but there is a lineage of artists from Europe flocking to New York, which was...
But they brought that with them.
They often brought that with them.
Yeah.
They often came from some degree of wealth, which is a whole other conversation about arts and wealth,
Absolutely.
Which is often there is behind the doors some family support.
Oh, it's rife in the music industry. I'm sure it's rife in the art community, of which I know much less about, but certainly money helps.
Oh my gosh.
To be an artist.
Some of the like most famous 60s musicians that we know, there's so many interesting backstories, and I didn't know this till a few years ago. It may be as longer than that, but I didn't know Jim Morrison, kind of the ultimate druggy bohemian guy that, you know, really kind of made his mark in Venice around here, is that his dad was a high-ranking, I think, admiral in the U.S. military. And you just kind of think like...
He was probably a youngest child.
and like how people kind of cultivate their identities and their stories.
Right, we're all mythologies, all of us. We all have to decide who we are and what we are, even within our own families.
Yep.
The mythology of what a first child is supposed to be.
For sure.
And you just wear that coat and put on that face, and good luck, get through it.
Yeah.
Did you believe in God growing up, and do you still? Is there a faith in your work?
I did, and I do. And it's like my relationship to faith is kind of seems to be continuously in flux. Like I have faith. I was raised in kind of practicing religion most of my youth and young adult life, and I've stepped away from that. So I was raised in Christianity and Methodist, so like generally kind of non-denominational. I bristle at what I kind of something, this is gonna be dramatic, but like dogma, and I really have not felt at home kind of within a church, but I do carry faith, and like I do resort to prayer, and like sometimes you know, my kind of concept of God is more of like a kind of a broader, like kind of cosmic consciousness. Whereas like, I feel like when I was raised, it was much more of like
guy in a chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, I do turn to kind of religion, and given the like existential nature of, you know, say my project, the Desert Lighthouse, that's found a kind of a strange, interesting relationship to religion, where some people approach it through art history. And there's famously in the 60s land artworks, where often it was artworks made in the landscape from the landscape. So there was, you know, augmentation of the landscape, like trenches would be dug out in particular shapes. A famous one is Michael Heiser's Double Negative, where there's a canyon, and bridging the canyon, he created these two giant kind of gashes that are, I don't know the exact scale, but they're a few 100 feet long, and then probably about like 25 feet wide. And so literally the entire artwork is of the landscape. And the lighthouse is slightly different, but it is a lighthouse that has been displaced into a desert, and it's very much the kind of art is created from that displacement and kind of the anomaly of this kind of futuristic lighthouse structure existing in the desert. So that's one entry point, but the symbology of a lighthouse in the desert has huge roots in Christian religion and has been argued most religions.
I was going to say Muslim religion as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
And one thing that's been very strange, and we can kind of get to this on the back end in our conversation, but one of the most unexpected things that happened in my entire creative practice, but for that Desert Lighthouse project, is that about a year and a half into its existence, it had been put up, I was visiting and I noticed what looked like kind of debris nearby. And so I wandered over, and as I was wandering over, it was a white cross in the ground and some tassel and then some hand-painted little signs, and a makeshift memorial had been placed there. And later I met the family of the young woman who passed away, not at the lighthouse, but nearby in Barstow. And it's grown a bit, and then, of course, the elements have since kind of eroded it some. But they saw the spiritual symbology of the lighthouse. And when their 34-year-old daughter passed away, they spread her ashes there and created a memorial. And I guess they lived close enough where they could look out at the lighthouse. And the mother said, when we look out there, we know that she's there. And so people kind of are engaging it completely outside the art historical context, completely outside, quote unquote, the creative landscape. And these are just people living their lives and faced with life and death, and particularly death and mourning, had this connection. And on another visit out there, I was doing some kind of emergency repairs, and a man and a younger kind of like teenage-aged boy came up on ATVs. And at this point, someone had tried to break into the structure. And so I was concerned, like, are they friendly? Are they not friendly? Are they going to rob us? What's going on? And it was the pastor of the local church. And so for listeners, the Desert Lighthouse is a 50-foot tall, fully functioning lighthouse in the Mojave Desert. It kind of has a futuristic look to it. It's made out of steel and polycarbonate, which is a type of plastic, and the structure is frosted, and there's internal lights throughout the structure. So at night, the entire structure glows like a spaceship.
It's
basically
quite something.
Well, thank you. And it's located on the outskirts of a town called Hinckley, California. And most people recognize Hinckley, California from the Erin Brockovich story. And if you're not familiar with Erin Brockovich, she was, I think, a paralegal assistant in the early 1990s. And she basically stumbled upon a high incidence of cancers among the residents of Hinckley, California. Later, it was discovered PG&E had unlined water pools in the ground that they were pumping toxic chemicals into. It was seeping into the water table, and locals who use wells basically were getting severe cancers. The town is decimated. A few people still live there. There is most people have left. PG&E has bought most of the land. There's some kind of old timers that stick around. There's some drug people. There was a recent incident of illegal marijuana farms out there, because it's a true kind of Mad Max. Like, I hate to call it a wasteland because I don't want to talk kind of poorly, because it's a beautiful landscape, and every person that I've met there has been amazing, but it's a very desolate,
it's bleak
place, very bleak. And so there's basically two things that still exist in Hinckley, is a bar and a church. And
they go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand.
Every place I've ever seen.
So I met the pastor of this church, and he told me that he came up because he thought we were breaking in, and he, at the time, I don't think he's still the pastor there. I think it's a older gentleman now, but that he would try to keep an eye out for the lighthouse, because him and his parishioners saw the religious symbology and appreciated it as a quote-unquote beacon of hope for the town, and that prior to the lighthouse's existence on this particular hill, which unbeknownst to me, there was a history of that church going up on the hill to make prayers, and so they actually had nicknamed it Prayer Hill. And
so it's already sanctified.
Yes. And so there's somewhat of an aversion within the contemporary art world to embrace religion. And it's just one of those things where obviously there's a complicated history to many organized religions.
Mm-hmm. But that's the thing about the child breaking away from the parent, because historically art was an homage to God and to the priests and to the saints and all of that.
Yep.
So and it would make sense that there would be a breakaway.
Absolutely. And, modernism, I think, was, in the most kind of dramatic sense, was a breakaway from, there was a lot between when the Roman Catholic Church primarily was the leading patron of art, and obviously there's a big history between then and then the earliest stages of modernism, but it was like the true rupture. What
I wouldn't give for a Roman patron right now.
Oh my god, yeah, the Medicis. I know. And they're out there. There's but it's so many artists are actually pretty private about their religious affiliations, and there's some major artists that, if you're close with them, if you're friends with them, they share, but it's kind of a little bit taboo. And then certainly within the narrative of an artwork, it's often really kind of, you want to not have that cross-pollination, I think, for some people, and I have been open to it. I think for my own spirituality, and also, like, the moment when I saw that memorial at the lighthouse, I realized there's something happening with this project that is bigger than me and my intentions, and I have to, like, embrace that.
Well, I also think human beings are in constant desire to see something bigger and something outside of themselves, just to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit like the gods must be crazy. You dropped a giant Coke bottle in the middle of the desert, and the people around it went, God.
Well, and some literally said UFOs, and that's the whole other thing. Yeah.
So when the night that we met at your pre-party show, there was a documentary that you made that was showing.
Yes. And
my friend Andrea stood and watched much of it, and we kept looking at each other like, gee, this is an incredible story. And I'm gonna make you. I'm gonna ask you to tell the story of what inspired the tower or the lighthouse. But to see all the cast of characters who were coming up with reasons of, alien technology, or there's a UFO out there, or it's a religious cult, or all these different things, and it just goes to show you how much we look out.
Yep.
To find an answer.
Yep.
Whether or not we realize we're even doing it, whether or not we even call it God or science or whatever it is, aliens and science sort of together because it's technological.
Well, it's like science and then science fiction,
but it's sort of this across the board. So let's tell the story of how this even transpired.
For sure. So the conception of the lighthouse occurred while I was doing a cross-country drive. There's kind of like a little bit of a backstory to that that's not totally relevant, but I had started my time at UCLA, so I was becoming much more invested in the arts, contemporary art, but I found myself stuck in Colorado during a giant winter storm, and the airport was closed for 2 weeks. So the only option was to drive back to California. And for a lot of reasons, it was important to get back for seeing family. There was kind of some like time issues. Anyway, on this journey, which was essentially a 21-hour nonstop drive.
Which makes you hypnagogic.
Exactly. And like, I don't really know exactly kind of how to perfectly describe my experience. I call it that I had a sleep deprivation induced hallucination. But it could have just, there's a lot of things that it could have been. It could have been just kind of hypnosis from that much driving. Basically, I kind of had these visions. And it's one of the really only times in my life that I can describe having like a vision where I'm like, I feel like I'm seeing something. And it was driving through Nevada in the middle of the night after having been on the road for probably about 15 hours plus, and you're just in the absolute emptiness of emptiness that you can experience probably without being...
It was nighttime.
It was nighttime, so pitch black. You're in like a true void. Obviously, I could look back, but obviously it was not a full moon, because in a full moon you'd be able to very much see the landscape. And so all you got was the little bit of stretch of road in front of you. And in that experience, basically I had like an agoraphobic anxiety attack, which I'm not a doctor, but essentially agoraphobia is a fear of vast spaces and being overwhelmed. That I've heard it described in different terms as situational claustrophobia, which is you're in a situation, you're very uncomfortable and you can't get out of it. And when you're in a vast space, agoraphobics often feel a similar panic to someone that might feel if they're trapped in a small closet.
Isn't that ironic?
Isn't it? Yeah, it's extremely ironic. And so in that experience, basically heightened panic, extreme tiredness, the hypnosis of a road trip, I basically saw this kind of shape on the horizon. And I interpreted that as a lighthouse. But it was a little bit more abstract in my experience. But I saw this shape, and then I had some other visions that later became artworks. And one of which the project is a project I'm going to start shortly. But anyway, I had this vision of this light that was hovering on an imagined horizon, because I couldn't see the horizon. It was pure blackness for a couple hours. And eventually I got back to Los Angeles, and so touched by this experience, and how I interpret what I went through was I was lost in a void, untethered from society, alone, without any point of connection, and kind of in my kind of anxious state were real questions of, will I be lost forever? And will I ever kind of find my way back? And so I was really kind of touched emotionally by the experience, but conceptually I thought, oh, this is very interesting. This is like, I liked the themes that it brought up of as being lost in a void.
Did you hear any voices?
I did not, no. And I've never had any type of auditory experience like that. And so I basically thought, like, I need to make this. I need to make as a sculpture, as an artwork, the closest thing to what I experienced, that being a lighthouse in this desert space, and that I'm probably not alone. What I felt is that I experienced something that is probably somewhat universal, although I may be more prone to panic and anxiety, but generally I could imagine that many people in a desert void at night would feel kind of an existential, like, gosh, this is like, we're really out here, we're really kind of alone, and that introducing a lighthouse into that space would bring kind of this religious experience, this emotional experience, this existential experience. And so that's where it all began. And
Did people think you were insane to say, I'm going to go buy a plot of land in the middle of the Mojave?
Well, I was operating largely kind of underground. So it took me 10 years from that experience to when the lighthouse existed. And so much happened in between. I returned to UCLA and completed my degree. I made other artworks. And eventually as soon as I graduated, I thought, like, this is the time I, like, really need to make this artwork. I felt like this is much more like a calling than just a career or an endeavor. And so I applied for grants, and I was emailing so many people for support, and a lot of people just would not reply. I mean, as most people in the creative field, when you have a project and you're trying to get other individuals to support it or institutions, you get a lot of non-responses, skepticism, people having a hard time understanding what your vision is and how it places in the cultural landscape and why they should support it. So I was receiving all of that, and of just really having a hard time getting other people on board, in which I needed, because how the hell am I supposed to build a giant lighthouse in the desert?
Yeah, I mean, I know you described it, but honestly, listeners, it is epically large. It's bonkers big.
It's a 5-story building.
Yeah, it's I would say unbelievable if I hadn't seen it.
And I'll get back to my story, but I believe it was around 2018. I was out doing repairs, and the lighthouse had existed for a year. I'd spent 10 years making it, and there's some nearby hills that you can get on top of, and one of them is actually slightly taller than the hill that the lighthouse stands on, and so you're actually looking a little bit down on it. And it was just past sunset, so we're kind of in that last light space where you can still see just the like kind of the purplish glow of the remaining light. And the lighthouse was fully illuminated. And there was a moment where I kind of thought, this is like a spaceship that has landed from another planet. And I'm the one who made it. And I know I have all the blueprints. I went through so much, and even having had that intimate relationship with knowing how it was made, because you know how people often will say, oh, I've seen behind the curtain, and the magic of something is lost. Like, even in that experience, having been behind the curtain with this for 10 years, it still had that experience. And I was very grateful for that. But going back to how this all started is that eventually I started emailing people with, I would first kind of sanitize the project and say, oh, you know, I would basically say it's a smaller structure. So originally it was going to be 20 feet. And just because I figured I didn't want to be intimidating to people, I would get them on board and then I might scale it up. And I kind of just started giving up. And I was just like, all right, if I'm going to email people, I'm just going to go full bore and tell them the whole vision, exactly how large I want it and everything. And eventually an organization called the Center for Land Use Interpretation emailed me back. And just a little bit of a caveat about them is they're a creative arts organization that is interested in kind of the anthropological relationship between human intervention in the landscape. So they'll do exhibitions on, they did one exhibition on the Interstate 5 route through the Grapevine, which is, I think, kind of the nickname for the Interstate 5 that passes through the mountains north of Los Angeles into the Central Valley of California, and it's a major thoroughfare. But there's so much history, and it's such an important kind of human intervention in the landscape that shapes a lot of Southern California as its supplier and all that kind of stuff. So they emailed me back. They're one of the people I emailed, and they emailed me back right away after I had sent the email, and they said, sounds great, meet us out in the desert tomorrow, we can help look at spaces, plots of land for you. And I completely panicked. Where I thought, oh, like I had wanted to do this thing, but I was completely unprepared to actually make it. And here's someone who just said, let's do it. And so I went out the next day and met with them quite nervously, because I kind of felt like I got called on. Like, I was almost like giving up on really believing I was ever going to make it. And they're taking me around in an off-road vehicle all around the Hinckley area, which they have a small facility near there, introducing me to kind of different spots that it could be made. About a year passes after this visit, and none of the locations they could provide would make sense. There were some issues with it being permanent, and eventually I asked them to write a letter of support for a grant. And they did, and I received the grant. And from there, I bought a piece of land, which was essentially a small hill in the area. And it's in view of Interstate 15, which is the other major thoroughfare coming in and out of Southern California. And that really got the project rolling of, okay, I own land. And now it basically started to like break it down into small steps.
Now you have to call your own bluff.
I know, exactly. And then it was like, oh, a number of years passed from that point, and I was invited to do an exhibition at UC Riverside about the lighthouse. And I called the exhibition Desert Lighthouse Ultimatum, and the central premise was everybody get on board or else. And it was
including
kind of
yourself.
Yeah, including myself, and it was kind of tongue in cheek. And the book I brought today for you was made for that exhibition, and it was called Desert Lighthouse Prospectus. And it's a satirical prospectus about like why you should invest in this project. And there's a bunch of essays from different people. And that exhibition, in that exhibition, I built what I didn't end up using it for the actual lighthouse, but I built the top 13 feet of the lighthouse in much more of kind of like a pared down non-structural that image.
It looks like the top of the space shuttle, or the part that gets knocked off.
Yes, like the capsule.
The capsule, yeah.
Comes off. And that exhibition completely galvanized the project, because a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, he saw the exhibition and said, we should really, if you do this, I'll make a documentary. And that was enough where I said, okay. And so I contacted a engineer. I had blueprints made. And it just, once the blueprints were made, all of a sudden I realized like, oh, this actually might be a whole lot easier than I ever imagined. Because the blueprints, it was like,
it's a tube.
Yeah, and it in blueprints,
it's a big ass tube.
Yeah, and like the structure is straightforward enough, like you're saying, that having engineered blueprints for it was not particularly expensive. And once I had blueprints, I could submit them for permit application, which a lot of people tease me about, but the lighthouse is fully permitted. And there was a couple reasons why I did that and why it was important to me. One, I wanted to last as long as possible. And two, I only had enough resources to make it, and I didn't have any money left over if I had to remove it. And so it was important that it not be forced to be removed. And once eventually, it was quite difficult getting approval to build a lighthouse in the desert, and there were a lot of people kind of smirking, and the planners for San Bernardino County, I think, had quite a bit of fun with like, all right, this is like completely wacky. And most of the classifications of how they permitted it was kind of through the cell tower allowances. It's not designated as a cell tower, but structurally that's kind of what their closest association was.
It doesn't have that as a functionality, though.
It does not, no. It kind of became this strange bureaucratic odyssey in which I would submit documents, and it was the opposite of the romantic experience that I had. And there is going to be an upcoming book called The Bureaucracy of the Light, and it's going to be about that strange bureaucratic journey of like relentless amounts of paperwork and photometric studies and soil samples and revisions of blueprints and public hearings and all of that. So
I want you to make a book. I told you that that night that we met. There's so many artists that have gone out and then done their own artworks on your lighthouse.
Yes.
That was a really stunning part of your exhibition, was to see how you have inspired so many with that one work and I just thought that would make a cool book.
Well, that will be. It'll be a much smaller book, but that's also in the works.
Good. The show that I saw,
Yep.
You were in a double show with Val Kilmer's work.
Yes.
How did that intersection happen?
Yes. So it's kind of a strange story. My exhibition, Desert Lighthouse 5, and Val had an exhibition called Some Notes on Nature. And I do not know Val, but I am somewhat in his creative community. We know Stephen Meyer, and he's a great individual, and Argot and Sarah Beadle. I don't know, you may know.
And oh my God, Brad.
And Brad. And so a long time ago, I attempted to make Radical Mountain, which I've barely talked about in this podcast, and it was a disaster. So the culmination, I've made sculptures related to this Radical Mountain project, but the culmination is going to be a landscape-art film - kind of action-adventure film. So it's going to be a feature film, and which is kind of a strange format because it's kind of a like land artwork. But I'd attempted to make it and it did not go well. And amidst that first time approaching that project, I had a kind of a mentor and friend. I have a mentor and friend named Doug Harvey, and he's an artist and a writer and kind of a brilliant mind. And he had encouraged me, you need someone really cool in this film if you're going to make it. And so Eddie Furlong came up as like, a really like eccentric type. And then I was like, Val Kilmer. And so there was kind of this running joke of, I'm gonna get Val in my film. And so one night Doug emailed me and he said, I have the phone number of like some guy that worked on a film with Val Kilmer, and it's probably out of date, but here's the phone number. And so he said, just film when you call it, like document everything. And so of course I did that and called it, and he was pranking me. It was a like this is before Grindr and before kind of dating apps, and it was a phone number from LA Weekly's like male to male hookup phone lines. And of course I call it, immediately I realize what happened, but I play along and I shoot this little scene where I'm, every caller that answers, I'm like, Val, is that you? And I have the footage and I think like, there's like something here that's funny and interesting, but it's not an artwork. I don't know what it is. And I never could figure it out. And so it's just footage that rested aside on my hard drive. I did an exhibition called Radical Mountain Embrace the Flatness in 2020. And I believe in October of 2020. And there are these two painted sculptures. And they're hard to describe, but one was, they're both the silhouette of a mountain climber cut out of like very thin plywood, and then intersecting with it was the silhouette of a mountain. And it was painted in such a way that when you moved around them, it was this optical effect of that the mountain would kind of become this mountain climber and then kind of collapse back into the mountain. And footage and imagery is available online. But in the press release for that exhibition, I got some help from Doug because he's a brilliant writer. And he mentioned the Val project in relationship to Radical Mountain. And it was just listed as like related works. And I blasted the press release out our mutual friend Sarah Beadle saw this, and I guess I forget exactly how it transpired, but she, I think, had mentioned it to Steven and said, oh, like, I know Val, and I'm kind of know friends of Val in his creative community. Like, would you send us this? We're kind of curious what this thing is. And
I feel like Val would be 100% behind it, too, when he saw it.
Well, and...
Because he's in on a lot of the joke. You know what I mean? Like,
for sure he is. And I think that's where, like... I think there's kindred spirits. I have a little bit of, like, trickster.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Val Kilmer to me is a trickster god.
He's such a trickster.
Yeah.
And so, basically, Sarah emailed me being like, send us a link, like, we want to see this. And I was so panicked. I thought, oh my God, like...
They're gonna sue me.
Well, and that, like, oh, this thing's like, this is a piece of crap that I made, like, years ago. And so... with old footage combined with some new footage, I edited together something that was like presentable. Mm-hmm. It's not like I'm actually reworking it now, but it's called Waiting for Val, and it's about just this like endless, absurd hunt for Val and trying to recruit him. And I sent it to them, and essentially I got connected with, Stephen Meyer and
who's great,
and individuals at Hellmel Studios, which is. Basically, Val created a studio that's kind of like a creative incubator. Mm-hmm. And I know that the pandemic somewhat disrupted their activities, but they've worked with artists and local kind of theater groups and have...
a lot of stuff with kids, which is nice.
Yeah, and it really have been this kind of community creative anchor, which has been really incredible. And I've had the privilege to attend some of their events and get to know everybody, everybody's been so nice and amazing.
Great. They're great over there.
And so when planning for Desert Lighthouse 5, my exhibition came up, there was going to be a Dutch artist of note in the back room. And I think he got too busy or this or that, but then all of a sudden we had an opening in the back room, and I thought, like, we were kind of me and the gallerist Carl Berg, who I've worked with for a number of years, we're having a conversation of like, what would be interesting back here? Should we try this Los Angeles artist? Should we try like this European artist? And I said, well, Carl, like, this might sound insane, but what do you think about Val Kilmer? He has these really unusual and interesting abstract works. Would you be open to that? And Carl was very excited. And so we all got to meet at Hellmel, Val's studio, and look over these works. And for the viewer, I refer to the works as portals because
they're beautiful. I really liked that show.
They're incredible. They're predominantly like 1 foot by 2 foot, so 1 foot wide by 2 foot tall, and they're abstract paintings. And generally, they all kind of have these kind of orb splatter formations in the center, and then they're made out of a mix of materials, often creating like conflicting chemical responses. So very strange kind of alchemical effects. And then they're sealed in resin, which gives them a photographic quality. And anyway, Val was excited about it. And, we thought it was kind of a unique pairing in which the lighthouse is kind of existential, but conceptual and architectural. And Val seemed to kind of have this, like, very different quality, very much like kind of chemical, organic, but like also
had a very root chakra grounding quality.
Exactly. And so I don't know. There was a little bit of opposing forces, but then
one yours being penetrative, his being receptive.
Yep.
There's a lot going. They definitely speak to each other for
sure.
Yeah.
And I thought this would be could be a very interesting pairing. So. And the response, I was very happy. Like, the response to the shows were incredible. Val's show looked beautiful. And I felt motivated after the exhibitions is that what I had presented to Val and his studio as in the form of this Waiting for Val video piece, I don't feel like it rose to the occasion of like an art film, but I am expanding it and reworking it, and there will be a true completed video piece waiting for Val, hopefully by the end of the year.
I love it. That's so great.
So that's the story of how it all came together.
I love it.
And for listeners, I did an exhibition recently in 2022 called Desert Lighthouse 5. And the reason it's titled Desert Lighthouse 5 is because it was on the 5th anniversary of the first illumination of the lighthouse. And paired with that exhibition was an exhibition called VPAC, Plein Air Views of the Desert Lighthouse. VPAC is a plein air painting group based in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, and it consists of a lot of well-known and some lesser-known artists, and they visited the lighthouse and created artworks responding to it. And that experience alone was incredible, because
I think my favorite was the one made out of rocks. I really liked
there was a box mounted on the wall. So imagine a cardboard box, a brown cardboard box with the top cut off of it, glued to the wall with rocks that were sourced from the lighthouse location, and it created kind of the shape of the lighthouse.
I loved it.
Although it kind of looked like this primitive phallus.
Yeah.
And
that's why I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with the lighthouse, when it was completed in 2017, it was this quite beautiful experience. There's only a couple really difficult moments. The permitting was emotionally quite difficult because your dream and your vision is subject to external forces that have no relationship, essentially, to contemporary art. Once I survived that, making it was quite incredibly pleasurable, with the exception of there was a minor accident. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but it was captured on film. Someone could have been killed. And
that was super stressful to watch.
It was a very difficult moment. Someone actually left their job over it. They weren't fired. They voluntarily said, I don't want to do steel work anymore. It was one of the steel workers that we were collaborating with. And beyond that, it was a really beautiful moment in my life that I cherish. And there was an aspect of that which was the excitement of unveiling the lighthouse and what the response would be. And when previously we were talking about people having religious responses, sometimes conspiratorial responses that you mentioned from this documentary that was in the exhibit. One of the responses was from the contemporary art world, which was essentially absolute silence. And I had been in the art world for about 15 years. I don't have a big name. I'm much more like on the emerging front. Even now, I kind of still, like, I might be like younger established, but I still knew enough people that I was quite shocked by the non-response, because I felt like this not only picks up the discourse of land art, in which MoCA at the time had recently done a huge survey of land art. It's like, it's not as if it's a dead conversation. And so I was like very, I don't want to say distraught, but I was like quite surprised, and it was a huge emotional blow that you manifest this massive undertaking, and it's only been in subsequent years that people have responded. The locals responded immediately. Some of them thought a UFO had landed on that inaugural lighting, and
even though they were aware of you building it.
Even though they were aware, a couple very inebriated locals drove up the hill, which was a whole other thing, and they talked about how everyone in the local bar, which apparently they could see it quite easily from their location, were all convinced this must be some kind of UFO thing. And the two individuals were quite proud that they weren't afraid of the UFO and that they came up there. And then there were other conspiracies about it being a military installation, which I think perpetuate to this day. And even Fort Irwin on their website mentioned the lighthouse as like a recreation opportunity for the soldiers nearby. And Fort Irwin, so the lighthouse is located in between Edwards Air Force Base and Fort Irwin. So for context, there's a lot of militarized activity in this region of the desert. Similarly, also around Joshua Tree with the 29 Palms base. So there's just cause for people wondering.
Also, you could have been abducted in that drive home and implanted with the idea, and now you've built it.
There it is.
Like
Yep.
Richard Dreyfuss.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, which it's entirely possible. So over time, about a year and a half later, the memorial, which really changed my perspective because I kind of felt like the lighthouse had failed to like achieve kind of like it's this point in connection in the landscape, but then it didn't become this cultural point of connection. And that the project kind of didn't seem to resonate. But that changed with the memorial where I thought, okay, well, this is way more important than the art world. As far as connecting with people on that level. And then in time with this recent exhibition and these artists responding to the lighthouse, I felt like, okay, something's happening here where it's achieving something that I'd hoped it would at some point in time, but then it just took a lot longer and was so much better than I ever imagined. And so I've like seeing the other artists' work, which some of them were really wacky. There was the rocks in the box, and some of them kind of had like these kind of UFOs, or one person painted these lizards kind of licking the lighthouse. And I never thought I would, at that stage in time, that I'd ever be in a room with all these beautiful artworks responding to what I had done. And so I felt like there was some incredible redemption or some kind of form of like, wow, how am I this fortunate to have done something that then has created a kind of moment of community and response. And
the fact that it came to creation because of immense loneliness you were feeling, and now it's proving to show you how you're not alone at all.
Yep.
You're connected more than you will ever imagine.
Well, that's absolutely true. And one thing that is interesting is my relationship to landscape has changed quite significantly in the process of making the lighthouse and maintaining it, which is a whole other thing.
Oh, I'm sure. And it's solar operated.
It's off-grid solar operated, and it's...
is it timer so that it comes on only, or is it always on? Okay.
It's timer, so it's essentially autonomous, although the elements out there are so intense. Often it'll get close to 120 degrees in the summer, like peak summer, and then obviously freezing temperatures in the winter. And so
it's like my apartment.
Kind of Los Angeles weather at times. It's due for a big overhaul, which the wind will tear off siding. I've engineered a new method for attaching the siding. It's very difficult to have a structure maintain itself, and just the UV of the sun is really profound out there. And so what's kind of underway is hopefully a full renovation where the structure is stripped of its old siding, painted, and then fresh siding with a newly minted observation deck. And then I'm working to organize a bus trip from Los Angeles out to the lighthouse, because although it's only about an hour and 50 minutes from downtown Los Angeles, it's somewhat intimidating, I find, for people to go, okay, well, you're asking me to go
take a left at the tumbleweed.
Exactly. And then they get a little bit more concerned when they hear about, like, oh, it's in a ghost town.
Yeah, full of meth heads.
Full of meth heads, which, they did try to break into the lighthouse, and I have a much more heightened sense of awareness when I'm out there post that happening. But this will be an opportunity, hopefully, for people to feel disarmed, have a fun journey, and get to experience the lighthouse at sunset. And
was that the sleepover that Brad was talking about, or was that something different?
It won't be a full sleepover. We'll get people back to LA, well in time for them to get home for bed. But it
please let me know. It sounds like
100%
a wonderful time.
And it should be so. One thing that was really beautiful. So I had what I called the launch event, which is the inaugural lighting, and I think about 40, maybe 45 people attended, which is somewhat significant given you're in the middle of nowhere. And there was something very special about a group of people congregating around this structure that prior to sunset, the lighthouse lights up and you have no idea that it's illuminated. And then as the sky gets darker, you start to realize the lighthouse is actually not getting darker. And then through sunset, the whole landscape gets dark, and then the lighthouse gets brighter, and it's a really subtle experience that is quite unique. And when you're out there, often you're not necessarily thinking about your email, you're not thinking about the errands you have to run.
No internet service anyway, I'm sure.
Exactly. And so you're a little bit more tuned into...
You're present.
Yeah, you're present. The wind, the smell of the dust.
Are you going to be on that other hill where you can watch it, or are you going to be at its base?
At its base,
yeah.
I think. Just so people can kind of be up close, and that will be a rare opportunity in which the lighthouse will be open for visitors.
So you can walk up to the top.
Yeah, because just for security and stuff and liability, it's something that people can come visit and view, but people, unless they're kind of with me or someone I designate, they're not allowed to enter it. And it is an aesthetic experience, external, that's the artwork for me, and it's a little bit less, although I like the internal world inside of the lighthouse, that's not kind of necessarily the intended.
That's a workout too, walking to the top.
Well, it's climbing. It's all ladders.
Oh, it's laddering.
Yeah, and it's staggered ladders for safety, but it's graded floor, so when you're at the top, you can look down and see.
Oh my God.
So that's kind of the latest with the lighthouse, and I don't know that I'm going to talk in depth because this project's less fully formed, but out on that journey in which I had the vision, I had another experience, and it's associated with another project that I'm going to be starting shortly called Radical Mountain. And it's essentially about an undiscovered mountain. Undiscovered mountain with no topography, completely flat. And so it's a little bit about science fiction, it's a little bit about belief, and where the lighthouse is about location, Radical Mountain's about absence. And so I kind of see them as somewhat
partners.
Yeah, like shadows of each other. And I'm quite excited about that.
That sounds like you'll have to keep me posted on that.
Yeah.
Is the documentary out for people to see?
The documentary is not. I've been passing around links for people. So what had happened is my friend who said, I'll make a film if you make the lighthouse. Well, he, in the middle of the lighthouse being made, he started having a little bit of success in which he actually had to step away. He said, I can't do this film for free when there's like a paying job. And he's gone on to have some pretty exciting success directing a big film for Amazon, and I believe he's been directing shows for Netflix and stuff. And
may we say his name? Or?
Yeah, Matt Sobel. And I think the name of the Amazon film was Goodnight Mommy or Goodbye Mommy. It's a remake of, I believe, a Swedish kind of thriller film, and Emma Watts was the star, and he did a really exciting film called Take Me to the River for Sundance Film Festival in, I believe, 2015. and I'll see him on Monday. So, and we may circle back around to complete this documentary, but what had happened is he had to step away, and I essentially said, don't worry, I'll keep filming. And so I just kept the cameras rolling and documented as much as I could with the hope that he would return or another filmmaker would return and be able to use the footage. Eventually, I was invited in 2018 to present some version of the footage for a screening with a fellow artist, Marnie Weber. And I've been connected to Marnie Weber. I've helped edit her art films, and we play in bands together. And so I put together a 35-minute film. And what was odd is that it was all, I shot it as if someone else were shooting it. So it's not vlog style. It's not like shot as if it were autobiographical. Yet I ended up making a 35-minute short documentary about myself. So that was a very weird process, but that's what you saw.
Yeah. Will they be able to see it, the listeners?
Yes, we'll provide a link.
Oh, wonderful.
And there's a lot more footage, and there's going to be new stuff filmed. I want to film prayer ceremonies with the church. I want to film some of the more conspiratorial UFO, enthusiasts' response. I want to film the lighthouse once it's been renovated again, and then kind of get into the response. So the documentary covers, it's called Desert Lighthouse, A Point of Origin, and it's about the genesis of the idea and the creation of the lighthouse up until it's illuminated.
Mm-hmm. It's a great film. I watched the whole thing, which I don't think I've ever done at an art show.
Oh yeah,
because you watch like 10 minutes and you wander off. And
often films at art exhibitions it's the worst film experience ever because
it's hard to hear.
The acoustics are terrible in art galleries, and often seating's not provided, which I did not provide seating.
Right, but we hung out and we watched it, and it was really something.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, I have to interview this guy.
Well, I appreciate that. So there's 2 additional parts planned. One about the response to the lighthouse once it existed, and then a final part that will be made in a number of years about its legacy of like how did it find its way into discourse or not, and where does it stand at like the 10-year mark.
I wouldn't be interested in 100 years when we're all dead and there's a cult that worships at the foot of it.
Well,
because there's no electricity anywhere in the world, and so this one lighthouse remains
illuminated. Well, hopefully we can get the materials to be sustainable enough. But so I've largely kept that documentary private with the hopes of, all right, well, it'll be expanded into feature length, and then might find its way to like a streamer or some kind of.
I feel like Sundance would love that thing.
I should probably. I've never tried to submit it, so
you should.
Okay, I'll do that, and so, but I'll provide a link. So
great, because I put links on the HeyHumanPodcast.com's website.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and it makes life easier for everyone. Tell them how else to find you.
You can find me at desertlighthouse.org, and there's a Wikipedia page for the lighthouse. And one thing that's being investigated is there's a website called StargateHinkley.com that I don't know if this is like a prank site, but it claims that the lighthouse is like a UFO kind of interface or something. It's kind of like QAnon, but
it's the same people as Birds Aren't Real, maybe.
Pretty much. I'm not familiar with Birds Aren't Real, but I imagine it's like a web.
It's like a prankster.
Okay.
It's They very they're very what's the word, stoic about it. Oh. It's very dry humor.
Are you familiar with the Yes Men?
I don't think so.
Oh my God. They have 2 films you should absolutely see. I think the first film is titled The Yes Men.
Okay.
And there's a genre of art called infiltration art. And it comes out of kind of prankster discourse. And I don't know that these individuals, and I'm forgetting their names, so I apologize. I don't know that they kind of position themselves as artists, more social activists, but they'll do really wild things. Like they'll get a website where it's like a slight misspelling of a company's name, but it's the exact replica of the website, and they'll get invited by like the BBC to give an interview, and they'll go and give an interview and say, here at Dow Chemical Company, we've realized the environmental impact and the negative effects that it's had, and we're going to donate like $12 billion over the next 5 years, and it'll like affect stock prices and stuff. And it's, these guys have the, like, I mean, I don't know how they do it, of their confidence and ability to show up. And so that's what I'm assuming, but they're hopefully this Stargate Hinckley. So desertlighthouse.org. If you want some fringe stuff, stargatehinckley.com. The Wikipedia page has a few links to news articles, and then I have a personal portfolio at danielhawkins.la, and that you can see more artwork that I've made, and you'll see a bunch of stuff about the lighthouse and some of my other projects.
That's really great. Daniel, thank you for coming over and for telling me this incredible story.
Of course. Thank you, Susan, for having me.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we met. And
me too. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
I will definitely keep you abreast, and likewise.
Yeah, it's really an astonishing project. I can't really describe it well. It's one of those things where you really absolutely have to see it.
If you go to desertlighthouse.org, there's enough imagery that I feel like people should have an impression. And then if they go out to visit the lighthouse, which surprisingly, if you go to Google Maps and type Desert Lighthouse, it will show you. And the lighthouse is a little bit in less than pristine condition right now, and hence the renovations that are imminent. But it's still an experience. It's still, everyone that goes out there really has a profound experience. And one thing that I was very grateful for is a really well-respected artist, Jeffrey Valance, who has a long history here in Los Angeles. He was invited to pick one exhibition or artwork that he experienced in 2022 for Art Forum's Best of issue. And he selected the Desert Lighthouse. And that was, for context for kind of non-art world people, Art Forum is kind of the preeminent publication. It's a print magazine and website. It's
a really nice print magazine.
Very nice, and it's almost like a book.
Yeah.
And it's very like Art World
they're
Insider.
Actually, I feel like they're I've collected a bunch of them.
People
I think
do.
They're collectible.
Yeah, and people really do. And when I was young, I'm still young, but when I was very young, I had fantasies of, wouldn't that be cool? And I'd long given up on that. And so that's one other spot that you might bump into a link online if you Google the Desert Lighthouse.
Sometimes we hold so tightly to a dream that we smother it before it can come to fruition. So when you do let go and you just work on your work, it allows it to get out into the universe and to do its thing.
Well, dreams and relationships, I find
that
if the tighter you hold on, the more it suffocates. And so it's nice to kind of let go, and then something kind of flourishes.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.